Hello, our truth warriors. It's been a long time since we've spoken to this guest, and the timing today couldn't be better with the current state of affairs. He's a top attorney in law and also ran to become Secretary of State and a senator in California. His passion for justice and people of his country are unparalleled, and it's great to have back on the Atlantic Underground podcast, Mark Meuser. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, it's always a pleasure. It's been a while since we've spoken, but it's really good to catch up. Mark, I know we haven't spoken for a while, and I trust that you are safe after the fires in California. What did you make of these fires and the way the situation was handled up there?
Well, first off, I lived about a mile and a half away from the Eaton fire, so they got pretty close. But I never was in the position where I had to move or I was on the hot list of being close to evacuate. I have a lot of friends who did evacuate and others who have lost their property. The area that was burned in the Eaton fire, which was the second biggest fire,
Yeah.
is area where I run and ride my bike all the time, and it's been very fascinating to get up there and just to see how you could have 10 houses in a row burnt down, and then it was like the flame would jump a house and then burn 10 more in a row, and or you would see one house in a subdivision just totally demolished and everything else was stayed put. And then you'd see a whole entire, 3 or 4 blocks just absolutely demolished, but one house stayed put. And it's really interesting to get up there and just kind of look at how that fire transferred around. And the winds that night were about 100 miles an hour, so flames would just pick up and just jump long distances. And sometimes it'd be a massive fire. Sometimes it just would burn one house. It just depends on how fast the firefighters were able to get to it. And, the thing is, it was a really windy night, but it was right after the start of the Palisades fire.
Yep.
And so, as such, all the fire resources were split that day. I think had the Palisades fire not happened, I don't think Eaton would have gotten as big as it did. It was just the fact that uh, so many resources were being split that night. It was quite a I don't want to say it was uncharacteristics because we've seen 100-mile-an-hour winds before. It happens, every decade or two. So it's not unprecedented. But what is unprecedented is first how the Gavin Newsom and the mayor failed to understand uh, how to stop this type of thing and how to prepare for this type of thing, but more importantly, how to even respond to it. And I like to liken, you know, state of Florida, they have hurricanes all the time. And their governor, DeSantis, was able to get the state up on track within days after things were rolling normal again. But here in California, yeah, Santa Ana winds happen on a frequent basis. I mean, it's a yearly ordeal.
Yeah.
And, the seasons or the cycles of water in the state are nothing new. I do a lot of reading of history. There's multiple books there of California's history from the 1830s to the 1870s. And every last one of them talks about how the cycles of the water, but how the mountains get enough water that that California could sustain, you know, 30 million people easily.
Yeah.
That's before modern technology. Back then, they understood that there was enough water if you rationed it outright, if you properly preserved it, there was enough water to preserve the population that California has today. And so the problem in California is that the political decisions being made by Gavin Newsom and by the mayor not to do proper fire prevention.
Yeah.
As you mentioned in your intro, I ran for Secretary of State back in 2018. I ran for US Senate back in 2022. And I've traveled around the state and I have sat at across the tables with lumberjacks and who have been in this industry for 50 years. And they have explained to me the things that need to be done to clear the brush, to thin out trees, to actually ensure that when fires happen, not if, when they happen, that there is the people and the resources to put it out quickly. And I'll get, I know I'm probably getting a little bit off
No, no.
here, but one of the things that has always stuck out to me is they said, when you have these lumber companies actively thinning out the trees, when there is a forest fire, they are able to shut the mill down and they rush to that spot and they're able to put it out quickly because they have a vested interest in making sure that their profits aren't going or aren't burning down.
Yeah.
And they are in the locality, they have the resources, they've built the roads to get in there. And it's just one of these forest fires puts out more pollutant than all the cars in California can do. And so, in the name of environmentalism, the Gavin Newsom is actually creating more pollution and more damage to the environment than if some common sense principles were put into place to allow them to come in and clear out this underbrush, to make sure that we had strategic water reserves, to make sure that, because there's plenty of water. There is plenty of water. It's just if you allow it to all go into the Pacific Ocean, you don't have the water when you actually need it.
Yeah.
Yes, we do need to fill our aquifers.
Yeah.
That should be a priority before you send it all out the Pacific Ocean. So I think that was a very long-winded answer to a very simple question.
Yeah, yeah. And I noticed you did use the word common sense and Gavin Newsom in the same sentence there, and they normally go hand in hand. I mean, you've challenged him legally on many of his proposed bills over the years. Do you think during your run for Senate that there could have been any foul play or vote rigging by Newsom and his crew?
The voter rolls in the state of California, as they are in many states, are not clean. We know this because there were a lawsuit in Los Angeles County. Over 1 million people were on the voter rolls who they didn't remove from the voter rolls as per federal law. We know that in California, we have this thing called automatic voter registration. Now, I am not going to say that the million here or the million there would have been enough to have changed the election results in my race, but they would have made it a whole lot closer. And
Yeah.
if they were a whole lot closer, you know what? People would say, oh, there's actually a chance for common sense to win in California. Maybe we should fund candidates. And it's going to take time to take the state back. But I actually think that there's been an awakening over the last couple years of people realizing that the failed policies of Gavin Newsom is not the way for sustainability, and it's not the way to make California golden again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we're going to see major changes overnight, but I think there is a trend towards common sense. In fact, I've often said that if you actually study the polling of the voters in California, California is a much more purple state than it is a blue state. It's just that the voter rolls are so bloated, and there are people who take advantage of those bloated voter rolls when, that means that there's reason to be concerned about people who may not have been properly, allowed to voting. I have heard so many stories, of my grandfather has been dead for 15 years, but when I showed up at the poll, I saw somebody had voted for him. His name was checked off the voter list. Does one or two stories like that change an election? No, but the more important thing is those stories get out. and people hear it. And when people do not have faith in the election system, they just decide to not participate.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that the number of people not participating in California elections, if they felt secure about the election results, we would see a lot more Republicans, a lot more common sense candidates be winning in the state of California, and a lot less of these candidates who are controlled by special interests,
Yes.
candidates who are uh, controlled by this left wing climate goddess environmentalism, where they every decision, like Gavin Newsom, is okay. We're not going to do common sense stuff to because all in the name of environmentalism.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, let's discuss the presidential pardons recently with the exiting Joe Biden and the 8,064 pardons that he gave. I mean, let's start with the likes of Fauci and his son Hunter Biden. I mean, are you not meant to have a criminal record or actually be incarcerated before you're pardoned?
You bring up a great point at something that I wrote about a couple weeks ago. Um, if you study the Constitution, the pardon power came through Section 2 of Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Now, at the time of the passing of the Constitution, it then went to the states for ratification, and they needed to get the states to ratify the Constitution for it to be valid. Now, there was a guy named Alexander Hamilton, and he goes, you know what? I was at the convention. I knew what was going on, but we now need to get the states to ratify it. And my state, New York, seems to be not willing to ratify it. So, what I want to do is I am going to write some articles and explain to the people what is going on. Now, just as podcasts are the way to get your message out in today's day, back in 20 or back in 1791, 87, 88 through 91, the way to do it was you would write an article and you would send it to a newspaper editor. Now, some newspaper editors were more influential than others,
Mm-hmm.
just like some podcasts are more influential than others.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember back about 20 years, there was this guy, radio guy named Rush Limbaugh, and he
Yes.
often said that people would listen to his show in order to prepare for their own radio shows and television shows. That what Alexander Hamilton did is he found the editor of a newspaper that didn't necessarily have the widest circulation in his city, but that had the widest circulation across the nation. This was the editor that the editors listened to. And they would take that article and they would republish. They're more likely to republish the material. So
Yeah.
what Alexander Hamilton did is he found the editor who was the most influential among editors and newspapers. And he started to write a series of articles about the Constitution. And then he recruited his friend John Jay, and he recruited his friend James Madison, and all of them combined wrote a series of articles about the Constitution and why it should be passed, why it should be ratified by the states. And in all these articles combined became known as the Federalists. And Federalist number 74, the 74th article that was written by this trio, was one by Alexander Hamilton. And in this article, he says, you know what? There's a lot of concern about this pardon power. This is something that here in the colonies, we're not used to seeing. This is something new. Governors don't have this pardon power. People, this is not something that the King of England really dealt with. This is something new. Let me explain it to you. And the first thing he said is this pardon power is to be used sparingly.
Yeah.
Now, in my article that you read, I refer to that, and you mentioned over 8,000 pardons by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
That is more pardons than a guy named Lyndon Johnson through Trump 45 combined. Combined. That's more pardons. So,
Yeah.
number one, the amount of pardons that Joe Biden gave is astronomical. It's off the charts. It's unprecedented. How many terms could I use?
Yeah.
But what's more important is that you understand, as Hamilton was going through and explaining this pardon power, one of the things he said is the principal purpose of the president having this pardon power is that when there is an insurrection and there is turmoil and there's division, the president can use this power to heal the nation. Now, back on January 6th, 4 years ago, there was something that was immediately labeled by the media as an insurrection.
Yes.
Now, I personally and our firm was personally involved in over 96 lawsuits brought against President Trump to remove him from the ballot because of his involvement with the events that happened on January 6th. And those people pushing the narrative that what happened on January 6th was an insurrection, were using that now to say, okay, President Trump cannot be on the ballot. And that case went, there were 96 of them. One of them made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court correctly interpreted the Constitution on that, said that this was a power that Congress had. It wasn't a power that the states had. But what is interesting is throughout this legal narrative, they were constantly pointing that the events of January 6th were similar to what happened in the early days of our republic called the Whiskey Rebellion. And that when the framers of the 14th Amendment were looking at not only the Civil War to frame it, they were also looking at the Whiskey Rebellion and saying, this is the type of people that shouldn't be running for office. Now, why am I bringing up all this history? It's because the very first pardon issued by a president of the United States, a guy named George Washington, a guy who was in the Constitutional Convention when it was debated about this power that was going to be given to the president. His very first pardon that he gave were to the people involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay? So, I've heard plenty of debate in the courts about whether or not what happened on January 6th was a rebellion. But let's just ignore that for a second and just take the progressives who were calling it an insurrection. Well, by their own terms, they called it an insurrection. According to Alexander Hamilton, that is the primary purpose of a president, to pardon somebody.
Yeah.
So when Donald Trump pardoned the people of January 6th, that was the purpose, to help bring national healing. Now, the people who are attacking Donald Trump for pardoning these people clearly do not want national reconciliation. They have lived off of turmoil. They have lived off of this constant beating of a drum of trying to divide us. And what Donald Trump said is, I'm no longer going to allow you to continue to divide us. And I'm going to heal the land, and I'm going to issue a pardon for these people who you have labeled as an insurrectionist. Mm-hmm. So on January 20th, you saw Biden do some last minute pardons, and then you saw Donald Trump do some pardons. And the pardons that Donald Trump issued mirror the pardons given by George Washington in an attempt to heal the nation after the bloody turmoil, revolt, insurrection, rebellion that we know in history as the Whiskey Rebellion, a rebellion that lasted multiple years. So, putting that aside, now let's go look at what the founding fathers said about this pardon power and how it relates to Joe Biden's pardon. Now, during the Constitutional Convention, the person who stood up and spoke on the floor the most, the person who debated the most, who had the most input and as to the words that were used, the powers that were given, each and every individual clause, was an attorney in Pennsylvania named James Wilson. Now, James Wilson later became a Supreme Court justice of the United States. But in 1791, he was a professor of law, and he gave a series of lectures on the United States Constitution. Now, remember, 1791 is right after the ratification. This is a new topic that, he's the first professor basically saying, okay, I was there. Let me teach you lawyers, your future lawyers, what the Constitution means. And when he got to the lecture on the pardon power, he basically said the pardon was to be given to somebody who was accused, who was tried, who was convicted. Okay? The Anthony Fauci's of the world were never convicted. In fact, one would say, were they actually even, accused by the DOJ? Here's the thing. The Article 2, or not Article 2, Section 2 of Article 2 of the United States Constitution says that the pardon should be given or can be given to somebody who is committed an offense. Offense is the operative word, an offense against the United States of America. Joe Biden's pardoning in the message says, please do not construe this, that these people committed any crime or offense. He used the word offense. Now, if by Joe Biden's own pardon, he says that this person has not committed an offense, how can you give a pardon to somebody who you don't even think has committed an offense?
Yeah.
And over 100 years ago, there was a very interesting case before the United States Supreme Court. There was a newspaper editor who was brought before a deputy attorney general of the United States. And the deputy attorney general was trying to make a case against a criminal, a bad guy that he wanted to lock up. Mm-hmm. And he comes to this newspaper editor and he says, here's a grand jury. I want you to tell us what you were told, what you know. And the newspaper editor says, I plead the fifth. Well, we all know under constitutional law, you plead the fifth here in the United States of America. It means you do not have to testify because the testimony that you may give give ammunition to the government to accuse you of a crime. So this entrepreneurial deputy attorney general of the United States goes to a guy named Wilson, President Wilson, says, I want you to issue a pardon for this guy so that he will tell me what he knows so that I can then go after the real bad guy. President Wilson issued the pardon. Remember, this newspaper editor, all he did was plead the fifth. He had never been tried. He had never been convicted of a crime. And the newspaper editor says, I plead the fifth. And the guy says, you've been pardoned. You can't plead the fifth. You have to tell me what you know. You've been pardoned. The newspaper editor actually went to jail, and the case made it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court said, we are not going to take the issue of whether or not the president had the power to issue a pardon before somebody was convicted. We're not even going to look at that issue. What we are going to say is, in order to get a pardon, you have to have committed an offense against the United States. And the first way that you're going to be found to have committed an offense against the United States is that you've been tried and convicted.
Yeah.
This person hasn't been tried or convicted. The second way that it could happen is that you admit that you have committed a crime and that you are now going to accept the president's pardon. And this particular newspaper editor has refused to admit that he has committed a crime. All he's done is pled the fifth. And we're not going to get into whether or not this was the right thing for him to do or the wrong thing for him to do. He hasn't admitted that he has committed a crime. And so, as such, because he hasn't admitted to committing a crime, he has not accepted the pardon. And because he has not accepted the pardon, he is entitled to claim the fifth, and it was not within your power to put him into prison. So what does this now mean for Joe Biden's family? And what does it mean for, more importantly, Anthony Fauci? Congress can drag him in and say, testify. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, he has a decision to make. Or let's say Pam Bondi and the DOJ decides to investigate him and try to compel him to testify. The second he is compelled to testify, whether it's before Congress or before, some DOJ investigation, he has a choice to make. He can plead the fifth, or he can confess to have committed a crime and accept the pardon. If he confesses, now all of a sudden, the issue is going to be raised. Well, did Joe Biden have the authority to issue that pardon before he actually confessed that he committed a crime? And that issue would probably go up to the United States Supreme Court. And I think there is a solid constitutional argument to be made that Joe Biden did not have that power. We know that Andrew Jackson, President Jackson, seventh president of the United States, was faced with this exact situation. And the Attorney General of the United States at that time told him, you do not have the power to issue a pardon prior to somebody having been convicted of a crime. So the people like James Wilson, the people like Andrew Jackson, his Attorney General, all the people who were in that first and second level of founding fathers all understood that this pardon power was not something that you gave before somebody was convicted, before they admitted that they committed a crime. And it is very likely that if this case went to the Supreme Court, it would be found that, Fauci or Biden never had this power, which means that if Fauci, in order to accept this pardon, actually confessed to his crime, and the pardon is found not to be valid, he could then be charged by the federal government. But even if he does, confess that he did something, which I'm not saying that he would, but if he were to confess so that he could accept the pardon, that doesn't stop the state attorney generals from coming after him. And I think this last week, I heard Ron DeSantis say that the new attorney general of Florida is actually looking at whether or not to bring charges against Anthony Fauci. Mm-hmm. Because anybody who studied American politics the last 2 years understands that the attorney general in the state of New York and the attorney general for Atlanta area both brought state charges against Trump, understanding that state powers allowed them to bring crimes against the state. And so even Biden's pardon, that's not to be construed that he committed an offense against the United States, does not stop any of these state AGs from bringing charges under their state laws, because our United States Constitution gave to the states a police power. It's up to the states to police their own laws. And the amount of federal crimes is supposed to be relatively small because the governing was meant to be more at a state level. So these state AGs have a lot of power to go after Anthony Fauci. And Biden's preemptive pardon, whether or not it's constitutional or not, will mean absolutely nothing. It will not stop any state from doing anything. So again, a extremely long-winded argument. You just let me go.
That was good. That's good. Now, we've mentioned two people there, Hunter Biden and Anthony Fauci, which leaves 8,062 other pardons there that have been given. Now, are any of the other pardons he gave unjustified, unlawful, unnecessary, or even more importantly, a danger to the safety of the American people?
Well, again, the pardon power of the president is, you know, it's just a couple phrases within Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. Just this week, we saw President Trump pardon the former Democrat governor of Illinois. Now, the thing is, whether you love it or whether you hate it, he was actually convicted of a crime, of a federal crime. That was within President Trump's authority to, hey, he's convicted of a federal crime. He said, you no longer, you're pardoned, you're free.
Yeah.
Many of Biden's pardons were of people who were actually convicted. Now, those that were not convicted of a crime, they have to worry just like, Hunter Biden and Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
Now, if nobody ever, if no state AG comes after them, if no congressional inquiry is ever held, they don't have anything to worry about. But the issue is when it's a preemptive pardon, what they have to be concerned about is that dilemma that they're going to be, in order to accept this pardon, am I going to have to confess to something, which now opens up all these other avenues, or do I refuse to accept the pardon and actually take the fifth, and now prosecutors can come after me and put on their case, and that's where yes, Biden gave more pardons than he should have, in my view.
Yeah.
But he has that power. And and as long as somebody was actually convicted, that's really within his power to do it. I may not like it, but it doesn't mean that the pardon is, anything less than a pardon.
Yeah. Okay. So
at that point in time, it's a political issue. If you don't like it, if you don't like how Biden misused it, well, unfortunately, he's probably never going to run again. But, his party is a party that has power. Make sure that those people aren't put into office.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What would you do if it was up to you to change the US and you were in the position to do so?
I love that question. And as somebody who studies the Constitution and understands a lot of what the founding fathers were trying to do, there are the number one tweak that I think needs to be done on the Constitution is there was a constitutional amendment passed a little over 100 years ago that said we are going to now directly elect our United States senators. Mm-hmm. Prior to that time, what would happen is the state legislatures would appoint the United States senators. And so what you had is the House of Representatives, Congress, was responsible to the people. That is who they owed their loyalty to. And so when they passed legislation, they were thinking about the people. U.S. senators were supposed to be accountable to the state legislatures to make sure that there was this balance between the federals and the states. And from that point in time, when we said, okay, both the House and the Senate are now responsible to the people, what we did is we cut out the voice of the states. And what allowed to happen is this massive growth of federal bureaucracy.
Yeah.
What allowed to happen is all this fraud that we're hearing about by Elon Musk and what his team is discovering. It would have been very hard for that to have happened had the United States Senate been responsible to the states, and the states reining in the federal government saying, no, you don't have the authority to expand into all these government programs. You are replacing the state and you're taking power away from the state. And so I think one of the, there other things? Yes, there's tons of things that need to be changed. But structurally, with the United States Constitution, the constitutional amendment that took the power away from the states to select their representative in the federal government, I think is one of the more devastating things that have happened to the United States to stray from our roots of being a constitutional republic. Yeah. Remember, we had the Lincoln-Douglas debates because the state legislature was to select who the United States senator was. And so you had two people saying, hey, vote for my party, because my party, if you vote for this person to be your local representative in Springfield, Illinois, he will vote for me and I will represent the state. That whole series of debates was not to really elect Lincoln or Douglas. That whole series of debates was being held in the parts of the state of Illinois where it was a toss-up of who would win those legislative races. So the series of debates, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, were held in these highly contentious legislative districts. Vote for my legislative candidate because he's going to vote for me. Yeah. That is what a representative government is. It's not that we, the people, get to vote for everything. We vote for the people who then get to rule over us. And in this case, you vote for the people who are running the state legislature, and those people are now going to send a representative to DC to represent their interest. And so to answer the question constitutionally, what I think would be the number one answer, that would be it. We could have a whole nother debate about the constitutional amendment regarding income taxes, and that, there are some people who will say that that's the number one fault, and I have fun debating them, whether it's the income tax or the direct election of the Senate. And both of those could be, would be very major steps that could be taken to return us to our constitutional roots.
Yeah.
Now, to answer that question legislatively, what do I think is probably the most important legislative change that could be made right now? Well, there's plenty of legislative changes that need to be made, but the one that I think is most appropriate to what's going on in the news today is how long it's taking President Trump to get all of his presidential appointments through the Senate. He has over 1,400 appointments that he can make. And because of the rules of the United States Senate, they are allowed to debate 30 hours over each nominee. And if the Senate met 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it would take, if all the Senate did was deal with the 1,400 presidential appointments, it would take over 5 years to get through them. When our nation was started, George Washington said, "Oh, I got a presidential appointment for the United States Treasury. I want to name Alexander Hamilton." He sent the note into the Senate, and within a couple hours, it came back. Rarely, when the Senate was in session, did you see something take longer than a week.
Mm-hmm.
We have now, in the name of tradition, which understand is not the tradition of how our Constitution was formed.
Yeah.
In the name of tradition, we have now made it so that the Senate, by their rules, is able to debate and discuss and deal and basically prevent the president from putting into office the individuals that he wants to help him pursue his policies that he was elected to be put in. And so I think whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, whether it was Obama, it doesn't matter who it was. The Senate, in the name of tradition, is now spending way too long dealing with presidential appointments.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been following social media, but it seems like every day I see somebody say Obama had 25 people in by this point, and Trump has 7.
Yeah.
Both of those numbers are unacceptable. I'm sorry. Both of those numbers are unacceptable. The president comes in, he should be allowed to put his 1,400 people in immediately.
Yeah.
Understand, there are millions of government employees there, and there's only a few thousand of presidential appointments that the Senate needs to confirm. Now, there are multiple ways that we could deal with this. We could deal, the Senate should change its rules that any of these appointments, if the president makes it, they have, 1 week, from when it's appointed until when there needs to be a vote. Maybe you do 2 weeks. But the fact that we are seeing grandstanding by senators in committee meetings, that's not getting to any truth. All these candidates submit long questionnaires. They know what's going on. The questioning really doesn't do anything except the fundraising of the party who's in the minority. This delay is only helping the people in the minority. It's not helping the person who is actually elected to help hold the position. And I don't care if your name was Bill Clinton. I don't care if your name was Barack Obama. I don't care if your name was Joe Biden. These are the people you were elected. And with that election, you were given the power to name 1,400 people to help you do your job. That's in the laws of our land that you have that power. And unfortunately, it has been so politicized by the Senate in their delay in the name of tradition that either the Senate rules need to be changed or a law needs to be passed that greatly restricts that. I've heard one person say what needs to happen is the president's appointment is immediately can start serving in that position and can only be removed if the Senate has a vote that says, no, you're not allowed to be there. There's some problems with that, understanding the terminology used in the Constitution. Something that I think, could be done would be from the day that the president gives the appointment, the Senate has to approve within 14 hours or 14 days.
Yeah.
That means in 14 days, they can run their background checks. They can do their Senate committees if they want. At 14 days, there must be a vote in the United States Senate. The clock starts. And once that 14-day clock starts, there is 2 hours. And at the end of that 2 hours of debate, you have to vote yes or no. And in that way, if the president drops 50 names or 100 names, you better start vote. If you want to have any kind of debate, you better get going, because as soon as you hit that 14-hour mark, you got a 2-hour window and all the votes have to have happen. And so what you would see happen is, okay, figure out who you're going to actually fight against, and everybody else is going to go through and they get start doing the job that the president has elected them to hold. So again, you got me on a soapbox there. I hope it hope
No,
it's
it's all good. It's like it's an educational, and it really gives me an insight into what's going on. Now, California faces mass illegal immigration and out of control homelessness and drug addiction as well. Would it be fair to say that Newsom has allowed this to happen? And do you think it can be reversed?
who the number one culprit is. I'm not willing to say that Newsom is the one who is to be blamed,
It's under his
but I
boots, though,
would
isn't it?
say, but I would say that he has enabled the problem to grow.
Yeah,
He is one of many who has enabled the problem to grow. When immigration is supposed to be more of a federal issue, but Gavin Newsom has said, "Hey, we are a sanctuary state. You come here, and we're not going to help the feds deport you." That
yeah,
doesn't mean the feds can't deport them, but he throws up obstacles that other states don't put up.
yeah,
When it comes to the issue of homelessness, we hear 50 million here, 50 million there. How many how many millions, billions of dollars have Gavin Newsom spent on the issue of homelessness and not solved the problem?
yeah,
We all know what the problem is. If you don't have enough housing for the number of people who live there, you're going to have a problem. Well, what's preventing you from building more housing? Well, permits, building codes, cost and stuff. Now, there are a lot of issues there. And, Gavin Newsom and his poor policies is just one of the many factors that is leading to the homelessness crisis, which is leading to, the issues that, higher crime that we are suffering. Now, granted, higher crime is not just Gavin Newsom. You have district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute people who have committed crimes. That is a contributing factor. There's plenty of contributing factors, but the ideology of Gavin Newsom and his party here in California is a major factor for why we haven't solved homelessness, why we are dealing with high crime rates, and uh, why Californians do not feel like California is a state. It's golden. It's a golden state. When I was born, California was a state that you moved to because it was a land of opportunity. It had the best business environment. It had the best schools.
yeah.
Now California has the worst business environment and has the worst schools. Um, the policies that you made that have put us in the place that we are in today.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I heard about California, which at first, when I first heard it, I couldn't believe it. And then I started seeing videos and things pop up on social media. And that is the fact that somebody could walk into a store and steal, I think it's up to $1,800 worth of goods and walk out and nobody can touch them. I mean, where does that make sense whatsoever in curbing crime and deterring people from going in and destroying businesses?
It doesn't curb crime. And it's why you saw business after business after business shut down and just leave because they decided, you know what? It wasn't, they couldn't protect themselves. The government wasn't protecting them. Crime was, increasing. Why was crime increasing? If you could steal, $700 worth of goods and you knew you weren't gonna go to jail for it, well, what's to stop you from now going into the store, stealing that, selling it, and now going buying the drugs that you want? There was
Yeah,
no incentive to take care of your drug problem. There's no incentive to stop crime because, there was no consequence to crime. You probably remember when you were a little boy, there were consequences if you disobeyed your mother.
yeah,
Mom said, hey, don't do that. If you did that, there might be a timeout. You might not get to go play with your friends. You might have to go to bed early. I don't know how your mom punished you, But there was a consequence if you did not obey the rules of the household. If there are no consequences to obeying the laws of living in a society, then why obey the laws? If you feel like there are no consequences to your actions, then you're going to just sure live your life for one person, and that's you.
Yeah, it is. It's insane. Now, has the cost of living and taxation become a big problem in the US for many hardworking, honest people?
I mean, very, very, I mean, all you have to do is look back 50 years ago where families lived on one income, and now families on two incomes can't even afford to buy a house. Um, there is the major problems, solutions which you and I are not going to take care of in the next 10 minutes here. But uh, yes, the issue of inflation. I actually saw something quite interesting, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it right, but it's like 20, 30 years ago, your rent was like $200, but a TV cost $600. So if you went and splurged on a TV, splurged on a luxury item, now, it had some real consequences.
Yeah,
Now your rent is like $2,000 a month, but for that same $2,000, you could own three TVs and, just this long list of stuff. So
yeah,
luxuries are no long, there's nothing that prevents you from buying the luxuries
yeah,
because the portion of what it is to your rent is so it has really changed over the last 20, 30 years.
yeah,
So as the cost of goods keep coming down, as electronics, whether it's TVs, whether it's computers, whether it's cell phones, technology, the price of technology keeps coming down, but the price of housing keeps going up.
yeah,
Why is that? Well, let's just look at it. They're not making any more land. Okay. But our population in the United States has increased. Over the last 4 years of Joe Biden, the number of people who came into the United States, I don't even know what the number is right now, but I remember at one point in time, it was like the equivalent of 5 to 6 new congressional districts. A congressional district represents about 750,000 people.
wow,
That many new people came into the nation contrary to our immigration laws.
yeah,
They need homes. They weren't building that many new homes. If you're not building that many new homes, that means the prices of the homes that are there are going up. If you're a homeowner, you don't mind the fact that your home prices are going up. But if you're just coming into the job market, graduating from college, and housing keeps going up and up and up, significantly higher than what your take home pay is, well, you're having to make choices to live with mom and dad or to rent or whatever. And, so that's the whole cost of living is it's a supply and demand.
hmm,
We know that here in the United States, the federal government owns a lot of federal lands that are not Mount Rushmore, that are not, Yellowstone National Park. They still own a lot of land that could be developed. There are, not everybody wants to live on 25 acres. Some people would love to own 25 acres on a lake and, be a gentleman rancher or whatever. But a lot of people would be just happy to, own a condo near where they work. They would rather not have to deal with 1 hour commute.
yeah,
But where the jobs are, it's not always where the housing is. And so, there's zoning stuff that needs to be done. But generally speaking, we need a lot more housing to keep up with the demand of what we're going through right now.
yeah. Now, Chelsea Clinton's just been accused of receiving $84 million from US aid. Her family have been clearly synonymous with absolute corruption. How would you handle the majority of politicians now that don't serve the people and just line their own pockets. Most of them are coming into a job that pays a salary of around $170,000 a year. And by the time they finish the term, they're leaving with in excess of 10 million in funds in their bank account. I understand this is being looked at right now, but if you were to do something to stop this, would you change it where people need to be clear with their accounts and prove at the point of coming into being a politician and leaving as a politician that they only ever received their salary and there was no insider trading and certainly no corruption involved? Is that something that you would want to tackle? And is that something that's being tackled under the current administration?
I'm going to say that I like history. You know that.
Yeah,
I want to take you back to right after the Civil War. The United States was building the Transcontinental Railroad. And what ended up happening is that the United States government was paying so much per mile of track. But in addition to paying so much money for each mile of track, the railroads would get, it was kind of a checkerboard pattern. They'd get so many, 10 miles from the railroad for 1 mile, and the government would get the other side, and it just switched. And that's how you ended up with a lot of railroad towns and stuff like that. But the railroads were given these plots of land that they could then develop to help offset their cost.
yeah,
Well, what ended up happening is that these railroad companies decided, hey, what we're going to do is, this money comes into the railroad. We're going to sell bonds into these railroad companies, but these railroad companies are going to then pay this other company to actually build the railroad. And we, the insiders, are going to own these other companies. The public at large are going to invest into the big sounding name, but what they're going to not understand is that the real profits are going to be made by this other company. But in order to make sure that our deal works, we're going to give shares of our companies give to the politicians. And shortly after the building of the Transcontinental, there was a major scandal in Congress because what would end up happening is, hey, I'm going to give you an option to buy this stock. Oh, okay. For $1,000, but you don't have to give me $1,000 because the first premium or the first dividend is due in 2 weeks and it's going to be $2,000. Oh, okay. Sounds like a great deal if you're a politician. I
oh,
don't pay anything, and my stock is going to be 100% owned in 2 days. And not only that, I'm going to get money. Sounds like a great deal, doesn't it?
yeah.
It it was the ultimate insider deal, and many senators and congressmen and future presidents were all tied up into this particular scandal. What I'm getting at is some things just don't change. The insider trading that you are seeing by congressmen, you started off with Chelsea Clinton, but you then kind of moved to the congressmen, needs to change. There needs to be a law that that if you're a politician and you're going to trade a stock, the way how I would do it is you have to announce that trade on a public site 72 hours before you do it. So it's like, I am going to be putting $10,000 into X stock. And in order to keep them from playing it, where they make announcements and decide, oh, it's now too expensive, I'm not going to do it, they'd have to actually put the money in some kind of trust. And at that 72 hours, they now get to buy it at whatever price it is. And it may not be fair, but to them, but it would be a whole lot more fair to the American people and to stop this insider trading that is going on. Now, another way that you solve this problem, and this is the more constitutional mindset of the problem, we only have 435 congressional candidates or congressmen who represent the entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
When our founding fathers set forth the Bill of Rights, They actually sent to the states 12 amendments, not 10, 12. 11 of those, 10 of those amendments were approved right away. Another one was recently, about 30 years ago, approved, which said basically Congress cannot raise their salary without an election taking place before they're allowed to receive it. The 12th Amendment of these 12 was that congressmen could not represent more than 30,000 people. And it was kind of staggered up to about 50,000 people. The reason for that is if you had a congressman only representing 50 or 100,000 people, it's real easy to replace that person. You could walk enough doors. If that congressman got out of line, he's your neighbor. You're going to know who he is. He's not going to be able to go, he's going to grow up with your kids. He's going to be at your softball games. He's going to be at your church. Your representative is going to represent you rather than the lobbyist firm. When you have 750,000 people that you represent, you now have to go buy TV ads to get people to know who you are. They hear sound bites. So one of the things, and it doesn't take passing this constitutional amendment, it's actually up to Congress. They could say, rather than having 435, we're going to say that there's 635. And maybe in 20 years, it's going to be 800. And maybe, we could slowly, grow this number so that there are a lot less people per congressional district. And there's a couple reasons for this. When you have, let's say, the state of California with over 50 congressional districts, it's really easy to draw a map in such a way to partisan, these people are all going to vote right. These people are going to vote less. Let's draw this map out. I mean, right now, 42% of the state tends to vote Republican, but they only hold, less than 20% of the congressional seats. You would think that you would have as many congressional seats as kind of the split of the people. But because you're able to draw those lines, it's much harder to draw those lines if you're dividing the state of California into 100 congressional districts or even 200 congressional districts.
Yeah.
A lot more work would have to be done via committee, but there are ways to do that type thing. You are giving more power to special interests. I mean, if let's just say for the sake of it, let's say there was 1,000 congressmen. It's a lot harder for a company to go bribe 1,000 congressmen than it is to really bribe 35 congressmen.
Yeah.
Because there's only 35, 50 seats that are really narrowly drawn that could go either way. All of a sudden, if you double the amount of Congress seats, number one, that's a lot of money to try to buy Congress, with special interests. Number two, the districts are going to be a lot more realistic in nature, which means it would be a lot easier to get rid of somebody. So, there's a couple things there to kind of answer. It doesn't take care of the Chelsea Clinton, but ultimately that's where Congress has fallen short. If we had more Congress people, the mindset of America has been, we don't care if we have hundreds of thousands of federal bureaucrats. We're going to make sure that there's not much staff for our Congress people. What needs to happen is that there needs to be more staff in the people's house to actually monitor what the people are doing and how our money is being spent by the bureaucracy. And when you make sure that there's not much staff for the congressional, they only have a handful of staffers, well, they're going to spend all their time making sure that they get reelected. But if you give them enough staff, now they can actually spend the time to monitor what is going on by these federal bureaucracies. And if they are actually doing their job of monitoring the people's purse, guess what? You're not going to have hundreds of millions of dollars going to, NGOs, which are just giving very large salaries to people who are well placed in connections. So, some of this some of this can be done by laws, but a lot of it also needs to be done by electing people who have character, who actually understand that it's not their money. They're not in this position for themselves. Their neighbors put them in this position to watch out for the people's pocketbook.
Yeah. When we're talking about the influence and disproportionate control numbers within governance, how do you see the numbers and the influence that APAC has?
I don't know that there's a lot of stuff that I'm knowledgeable on and can talk about. I don't know that I'm going to be the best to really dive into it to give any insight on that for your listeners here.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Do you think Trump is in charge, or are the powers above him that control all governments globally through financial weaponization? And I'm talking about the central banks and the amount of power that they have over every government around the world.
I do not believe I have any evidence that President Trump is being controlled by anybody right now. He because of his wealth, he doesn't have to be doing what he's doing. I think he's having fun doing what he's doing.
Looks like
Uh,
it.
you know, and I think there are plenty of people who wish he was a little bit more controlled than he is. But no, Elon Musk doesn't have to do what he's doing right now. Donald Trump doesn't have to do what he's doing right now. But there's a patriotism
Yeah,
to that's inside both of those guys that they're sick and tired of this inside politics. And it's like, what can I do in a very short period of time to proverbially drop the hand grenade into the enemy post and just see what we can do to clean up a problem in a short period of time.
will he ever audit the Federal Reserve? And if they do you think there's going to be stuff exposed there that they don't want to get out?
Um, we will see. You know, I've been thoroughly entertained over the last couple weeks. Just today I did a tweet. Some congresswoman was complaining about the Pentagon not changing, not passing audits for the last 7 years. And I kind of said, and please remind me what you have done over the last several years to actually go root out that waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah,
Stop talking about it and doing it. Okay. Just because they're not going after your pet project right now, doesn't stop you from going after it right now. They're going to go one step at a time. And, I think we've all heard the stories about $600 toilet seats or screwdrivers or whatever. There's enough anecdotal stories there that I think that if Elon Musk decides to go after it, there's going to be some howling from the Pentagon.
absolutely.
But I think you got to I think Elon and Trump understand a very important thing. That is, uh, you go after the areas that the people are going to agree with you on. People don't think that their tax dollars should be spent on, transgender plays in some foreign country. They're, maybe they would have a whole lot less problem with, taking care of cancer in some foreign country, and which is why that's the talking point of the left. They keep talking about us, but it's like, where's the evidence that this is actually the stuff that's being stopped right now? What's being stopped right now are $50 million here, $50 billion here,
Yeah.
here a million, there a million, here, everywhere a million, million. And the stories of what they're finding is giving more support that, oh, we need to be doing this throughout the government. And so, yes, US aid has got a lot of the initial attention, but I'm following Lee Zeldin of the EPA. And in the last 2 days, I've seen two different tweets about, hey, or actually, I think I'm now up to three. Hey, we just saved the American taxpayer dollars, 50 million here. We canceled these contracts. Here's another 50 million that we've saved. If you start getting all of these uh, secretaries emboldened by what Elon Musk is doing, you're going to start finding they're going to start competing against each other about how they're saving taxpayers money, and America's going to win.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you see Robert F. Kennedy making a run for president in 2028?
That's possible.
Yeah.
Uh, it's going to be a wide open environment in 4 years. I think there are going to be many people on both sides of the aisle making a run for it. It's going to be quite interesting to watch who all is going to be making a run for it. The campaign, well, nobody is pulling papers right now. The campaign has basically started.
Hmm.
you know, people who are within the Trump administration, from JD Vance as vice president to any of these secretaries, Marco Rubio and stuff like that, they're going to, be having to prove themselves over the 4 years of the job that they have done, and and why they should be that nominee. There's going to be United States senators who are going to be making plays for position. There's going to be congressmen. There's going to be governors, on both sides of the aisle. It's going to be fast. It's not very often that you got a completely open seat uh, where both parties are going to have an opportunity to make their case to American people. And I for one, am going to be fascinated by watching.
Yeah. Do you think you'll be ever putting yourself forward again for a position within the Senate?
We will, we will see what my future holds. We're in the process of looking at what the next, I'm kind of doing my next 5-10 year plan.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of success in the last couple of years. Some of the things that I've been able to do, both legally and through politics. And, we're actually in the process of looking what the future is going to hold.
Excellent. Well, it's been incredible to catch up, Mark. So much in-depth information there. From what I thought I knew to what I know now, I've got to go away and really consider what views I had on things after this discussion. And I hope that many other people out there can also listen to this and certainly readjust their sails to what they think and maybe head in a different direction. So incredible talk again. We're not going to leave it so long next time.
Sounds like a plan.
Touch and see what's going on in the world, because quite frankly the world is moving at such a rapid pace now, it's very difficult to keep up with what's actually going on. But
I it's entertaining.
it is entertaining, but it shouldn't be.
Uh,
So anyway, sir, an absolute pleasure. Really good catching up again, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. As we always say here on the Atlantic Underground, believe nothing and question everything. And we'll talk soon and keep in touch, Mark. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Cheers.